I'd been a patrol officer for 12 years, and what happened at the old Meridian manufacturing plant still haunts me. What we discovered that October night changed everything I thought I knew about how far people will go to hide their crimes. The Meridian plant had been abandoned since 2018 when the company relocated overseas. For 5 years, it sat empty on Industrial Boulevard, collecting graffiti and ghost stories. Local kids claimed they heard machinery running at night. Neighbors reported seeing lights in the windows. The stories got wilder over time. People talked about supernatural activity, cursed equipment, workers who died in accidents still operating the machines. All bullshit, of course. But effective bullshit. I was working third shift patrol when dispatch sent me to investigate a noise complaint. Mrs. Chen, who lived in the apartments across from the plant, called about that damn machinery running again. She'd called 6 times in the past month. Each time, officers would drive by, see nothing, and mark it unfounded. Probably just acoustics from the highway. My partner Rodriguez always said, "Sound carries weird at night." But Mrs. Chen was insistent. She'd lived there for 20 years and knew the difference between highway noise and factory equipment. When I arrived at 2:47 a.m., I understood why previous officers hadn't taken it seriously. The building looked completely dead, broken windows, rusted gates, weeds growing through the parking lot cracks. Then I heard it. A low, rhythmic humming. Mechanical. Definitely coming from inside the building. I radioed for backup and approached the main entrance. The chain-link gate was secured with a padlock, but when I examined it closely, I noticed the metal had been cut and rewelded. Fresh work, painted over to look old. Someone had been accessing this property regularly. The humming stopped. Rodriguez arrived 15 minutes later, skeptical as always. "You sure it wasn't just the HVAC system from the strip mall next door?" We walked the perimeter together. The loading dock had the same setup locks that looked secure but had been tampered with. Fresh tire tracks in the gravel behind the building, partially hidden by scattered debris. Someone had been very careful to make this place look abandoned while maintaining access. "We need to get inside," I told Rodriguez. "Not without a warrant. Property owners in Taiwan somewhere. Could take days." But Mrs. Chen called again at 4:23 a.m. This time she was frantic. "There are trucks back there. Big trucks. They're loading something." We drove around to the rear access road. Empty. But the gravel showed clear evidence of heavy vehicle traffic. The tracks were fresh, still damp from the previous evening's rain. I made a decision that probably saved lives. "Exigent circumstances," I told Rodriguez. "If there's criminal activity in progress, we don't need a warrant." Getting inside required calling our sergeant, who called the lieutenant, who finally authorized forced entry based on the ongoing complaints and evidence of trespassing. By 6 a.m., we had bolt cutters and proper backup. The main floor looked exactly like you'd expect from an abandoned factory. Debris, broken glass, graffiti, pigeon droppings. But the dust patterns were wrong. Clear pathways through areas that should have been uniformly dirty. Equipment moved recently, then repositioned to look untouched. The real discovery came when Officer Martinez noticed the electrical panel. "Hey, this breaker box is warm." The building was supposed to be disconnected from the grid, but someone had illegally tapped into the main power line and rigged a bypass system. Professional work, probably done by someone with electrical contractor experience. "Follow the power," Sergeant Williams decided. The active electrical lines led to a section of the factory that had been walled off with false panels. From the outside, it looked like structural damage. From the inside, we found a sophisticated operation that had been running for at least 8 months. They weren't manufacturing supernatural activity. They were manufacturing methamphetamine. The operation was impressive and terrifying. Industrial-grade equipment, professional ventilation systems, chemical storage that followed proper safety protocols. This wasn't some trailer park cook operation. This was large-scale production with distribution capabilities. The really disturbing part was how they'd used local superstitions as security. They'd actively encouraged the ghost stories. Equipment timers created the mysterious sounds neighbors reported. Motion-activated lights in empty sections made the building appear haunted. They'd even hired local teenagers to spread stories about seeing apparitions and experiencing supernatural encounters. Genius, really, Detective Morrison said during the follow-up investigation. Nobody wants to investigate a haunted factory. Even cops avoid places with supernatural reputations if they can. The operation's sophistication became clear as we processed the scene. Shift schedules coordinated to avoid peak patrol times. Lookouts positioned to monitor police routes. Emergency protocols for rapid equipment shutdown and personnel evacuation. These people had studied law enforcement patterns and designed their operations specifically to avoid detection. We found production logs indicating they'd been manufacturing approximately 50 pounds of methamphetamine per week. Street value, roughly $180,000 weekly. They'd been operating under our noses for 8 months, hidden behind ghost stories and local folklore. The arrests came over the following weeks. 12 people total, including 2 former chemical plant workers, an electrician, and a logistics coordinator who'd previously worked for a legitimate pharmaceutical company. The operation was more professional than most legal manufacturing facilities I'd seen. But what really disturbed me was the psychological manipulation. They'd systematically exploited community fears and superstitions to create a protective barrier around their criminal enterprise. Mrs. Chin had been reporting legitimate criminal activity for months, but nobody took her seriously because everyone knew the factory was haunted. How many other crimes hide behind stories we're too embarrassed to investigate? How many legitimate witnesses get dismissed because their reports sound supernatural? The case changed how our department handles unusual calls. We now investigate every noise complaint, every strange light, every impossible report. Because I learned that the most unbelievable stories sometimes hide the most serious crimes. The Meridian plant sits empty again now. But sometimes I wonder what other abandoned buildings in our district might be hiding operations behind carefully constructed myths and local legends. What's the strangest thing you've heard about an abandoned building in your area? Have you ever avoided investigating something because the stories surrounding it seemed too unbelievable? Sometimes the most rational criminals use our own skepticism against us. 3 months after the Meridian factory case, I got called to Regional Medical Center for what dispatch labeled a psychiatric patient disturbance. What I found was something far more calculated and dangerous, a deliberate campaign to undermine medical care that nearly killed multiple patients. Dr. Sarah Kim met me at the nurse's station at 3:15 a.m., visibly shaken. She'd been head of internal medicine for 8 years and had never called police about a patient before. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled up patient charts on her tablet. Officer Chin, we have a serious situation with a patient named Marcus Webb. He was admitted 5 days ago for chest pains, but his behavior is deeply disturbing. He's been systematically moving through patient rooms, telling people not to take their medications and convincing them that we're actively trying to harm them. Initially, this sounded like standard psychiatric issues. Hospitals deal with paranoid patients regularly, especially those experiencing medication side effects or withdrawal. But Dr. Kim's detailed description revealed something far more sinister and organized. He knows our protocols intimately. He knows which medications we prescribe for specific conditions, understands drug interactions, and can cite medical studies. He's not delusional or confused, he's systematically undermining patient care with what appears to be legitimate medical knowledge. But there's something wrong with his information. Webb, age 45, had been admitted through the emergency department on October 15th with complaints of chest pain, shortness of breath, and radiating arm pain. His insurance information checked out completely. His identification was legitimate, and his presenting symptoms were entirely consistent with potential cardiac issues requiring immediate evaluation. The admission process had been routine. Webb was cooperative, answered medical history questions appropriately, and submitted to all standard cardiac testing including EKG, blood work, and chest X-rays. His test results showed minor abnormalities that warranted observation, but weren't immediately life-threatening. But within 24 hours of admission, his behavior became increasingly problematic in ways that weren't immediately obvious to medical staff focused on his cardiac care. He told Mrs. Rodriguez in room 314 that her diabetes medication would cause irreversible kidney failure within 6 months. Dr. Kim explained, pulling up incident reports on her computer. Mrs. Rodriguez has been managing type 2 diabetes for 20 years and knows her medications intimately. But Webb was so convincing, presenting what sounded like legitimate medical research, that she refused her insulin for 12 hours. We nearly had a diabetic ketoacidosis emergency. I requested to interview the nursing staff who'd been working Webb's floor. The pattern they described was chilling in its calculated precision. He had a schedule, reported Nurse Patricia Williams, who'd worked the night shift for 6 years. He'd move between patient rooms during shift changes, when we're busy with handoff reports and monitoring is lighter. He never stayed long enough to seem suspicious, but long enough to plant seeds of doubt about their treatment. Night nurse Kevin Torres had noticed Webb's unusual mobility. Most cardiac patients stay in bed, especially those with chest pain complaints. But Webb was constantly walking the halls, always with some excuse going to the bathroom, stretching his legs on doctor's orders, looking for ice chips. He knew exactly when staff would be distracted. Webb's approach was sophisticated and psychologically manipulative. He didn't present himself as a conspiracy theorist or make wild claims about medical cover-ups. Instead, he positioned himself as a former medical professional who understood what doctors don't want patients to know about medication risks. His technique was terrifyingly effective because it exploited patients' natural vulnerabilities during medical crises. He would sit with patients, express sympathy for their conditions, and gradually introduce doubts about their prescribed treatments. He told Mr. Franklin that blood thinners were actually designed to cause controlled internal bleeding to generate repeat hospital visits for profit. Nurse Williams reported. Mr. Franklin had just suffered a minor stroke. Those anticoagulation medications are literally keeping him alive and preventing another stroke. Webb had convinced an elderly pneumonia patient that antibiotics would destroy her immune system permanently. He told a post-surgical patient that pain medications were deliberately addictive to create long-term pharmaceutical dependencies. Each conversation was tailored to the specific patient's fears and medical conditions. When I spoke with Webb directly in his room, I immediately understood why he was so effective at manipulation. He was articulate, well-groomed, and presented himself with the calm, authoritative demeanor of a medical professional. He didn't seem mentally ill, agitated, or delusional. He seemed like someone sharing important information out of genuine concern for fellow patients. "Officer, I'm just trying to help people understand their treatment options," Webb told me, speaking in measured, professional tones. "These doctors are overworked and underpaid. They rely on pharmaceutical protocols without considering individual patient needs. I have a moral responsibility to share what I know about medication risks." But when I asked specific questions about his medical background, inconsistencies emerged. His medical knowledge contained subtle inaccuracies that could prove fatal if patients followed his advice. He understood enough about medicine to sound credible, while providing information that could kill vulnerable people. I immediately ran his background through our database systems. Marcus Webb wasn't a doctor, physician's assistant, or registered nurse. But he had worked as a medical equipment salesman for pharmaceutical companies for 12 years, which explained his familiarity with medical terminology and drug protocols. His employment history revealed a pattern of professional misconduct. He'd been terminated from 3 pharmaceutical sales positions over the past 2 years for inappropriate contact with healthcare providers and boundary violations with medical staff. His most recent employer, MedTech Solutions, had fired him 8 months earlier after complaints from multiple hospitals about his unprofessional behavior. The investigation revealed Webb's true motivation and the extent of his planning. His ex-wife, Dr. Jennifer Webb, worked as an emergency physician at Regional Medical Center. She'd filed for divorce 18 months earlier and obtained a restraining order after discovering he'd been accessing her computer to read confidential patient files and hospital communications. Court records showed Webb blamed his ex-wife and regional medical center for destroying his career and reputation. He'd made threats during divorce proceedings about exposing the truth about hospital practices and showing patients what doctors really do to them. Detective Morrison's follow-up investigation revealed the sophisticated nature of Webb's plan. He'd been preparing this for months, Morrison discovered. He researched which medical symptoms would guarantee hospital admission, studied regional medical centers' staffing patterns and protocols, and timed his fake cardiac event to coincide with his ex-wife's shift schedule. Webb had deliberately induced his chest pain symptoms using over-the-counter stimulants and caffeine pills, creating legitimate cardiac irregularities that required medical attention. His research into heart attack presentation was thorough enough to fool emergency room physicians during initial evaluation. The real horror became clear as we documented the full scope of his 5-day manipulation campaign. Webb had systematically targeted the most vulnerable patients, elderly individuals with complex medical conditions, post-surgical patients in pain, and people facing frightening diagnoses who were desperate for hope or alternative explanations. In just 5 days, Webb had convinced 8 patients to either refuse prescribed medications or significantly alter their treatment regimens. The medical consequences were severe and potentially fatal. Mrs. Rodriguez, the diabetic patient, had gone into early diabetic ketoacidosis when she stopped taking insulin. Emergency intervention was required to prevent coma or death. Mr. Franklin, the stroke patient, had stopped taking prescribed blood thinners. His blood pressure spiked dangerously, and brain scans showed evidence of additional small strokes that occurred during the medication gap. The elderly pneumonia patient, Mrs. Patterson, had stopped taking antibiotics and developed sepsis, a life-threatening systemic infection. She required intensive care treatment and nearly died from Webb's advice. A post-surgical patient had stopped taking prescribed pain medication, leading to dangerous blood pressure spikes that threatened surgical site healing and created risk for cardiac events. 2 other patients had modified their medication schedules based on Webb's recommendations, creating dangerous drug interaction risks that required emergency pharmacy consultations. Webb was arrested and charged with 8 counts of reckless endangerment, impersonating a medical professional, violating a restraining order, and criminal mischief. The district attorney's office considered additional charges related to practicing medicine without a license and endangering vulnerable adults. During the search of Webb's apartment, we discovered the full extent of his obsession with regional medical center. He had detailed files on staff schedules, patient admission patterns, medication protocols, and hospital security procedures. He'd been photographing the building, tracking employee parking patterns, and monitoring his ex-wife's schedule for months. His computer contained research on various medical conditions, pharmaceutical side effects, and patient psychology. He'd studied manipulation techniques and had practiced his concerned former medical professional persona extensively. But the psychological damage Webb inflicted lasted much longer than the immediate physical harm. Patients who trusted his advice became deeply suspicious of all medical recommendations. Some required extensive counseling and psychiatric support to overcome their fear of taking prescribed medications. Mrs. Rodriguez later told Dr. Kim that Webb's manipulation had destroyed her faith in doctors. She'd been successfully managing diabetes for decades, but Webb's warnings created anxiety that interfered with her self-care for months afterward. The hospital implemented comprehensive new protocols to prevent similar incidents. Security cameras were installed in patient hallways. Staff received training on identifying manipulation tactics and unauthorized medical advice. Visitor policies were strengthened, and patient room checks were increased during shift changes. Dr. Kim established a reporting system for unusual patient interactions and suspicious medical discussions. We now pay immediate attention when someone presents themselves as having special medical insights without proper credentials, she explained. Real medical professionals identify themselves properly and work within established channels. The case fundamentally changed how regional medical center handled patients with unusual medical knowledge or those who questioned standard treatment protocols. Social workers were brought in to help patients process medical anxiety, and distinguish between legitimate second opinions and dangerous misinformation. What disturbed me most about Webb's case was how easily he'd gained trust from vulnerable people. Patients facing serious medical conditions are naturally frightened and confused. They want to believe someone cares enough to share insider information that might help them avoid suffering or complications. Webb exploited their fear, uncertainty, and desire for control during medical crises. His sales background made him expert at reading people, identifying their specific anxieties, and presenting compelling arguments tailored to their individual psychological vulnerabilities. The case also revealed how dangerous partial medical knowledge can be when wielded with malicious intent. Webb understood enough about medicine to sound credible, while providing information that could prove fatal. His familiarity with medical terminology and drug interactions gave his advice an appearance of legitimacy that was terrifyingly convincing. 6 months later, I learned that Webb had attempted similar manipulation at 2 other hospitals in neighboring counties before his arrest. His pattern was consistent fake medical emergency for admission, systematic patient manipulation during recovery, targeting of vulnerable individuals with complex medical needs. The broader investigation revealed that Webb wasn't an isolated case. Hospital security directors reported increasing incidents of individuals attempting to undermine patient care through misinformation campaigns. Some cases involved family members with grudges against medical staff. Others involved people with untreated mental illness who developed elaborate theories about medical conspiracies. But Webb's case was unique in its calculated malice and sophisticated execution. He'd weaponized medical knowledge and sales skills to endanger lives as revenge against his ex-wife and former employer. What makes this case particularly haunting is how it exploited the fundamental trust relationship between patients and healthcare providers. Webb understood that scared, vulnerable people are desperate for someone who seems to care about their well-being and offers hope for better outcomes. Have you ever encountered someone who seemed to have special medical knowledge but wasn't actually a healthcare professional? How do you verify medical advice when you're scared and vulnerable in a hospital setting? Sometimes the most dangerous people are those who know just enough to sound like experts while harboring deadly intentions. 6 weeks after the hospital case, I responded to what seemed like a routine mail theft complaint. What we uncovered was a sophisticated surveillance and manipulation operation targeting an entire neighborhood through postal interference. Mail carrier Jennifer Santos had been delivering Route 47 for 3 years when the harassment started. She first noticed the white sedan following her truck in late November. Initially dismissing it as coincidence, the pattern became undeniable when the same vehicle appeared daily, maintaining consistent distance while she completed her deliveries. At first I thought it was road construction or something, Santos told me during our interview. But this car would stop when I stopped, turn when I turned. Always staying about a block behind my postal truck. The surveillance escalated beyond simple following. Santos began noticing individuals photographing her from vehicles, documenting her delivery schedule and route timing. She reported feeling watched constantly during work hours. More disturbing were the delivery discrepancies residents began reporting. Mrs. Elizabeth Morrison on Maple Street received her neighbor's bank statements. David Chin got someone else's medical bills. Sarah Williams received legal documents intended for a household 3 blocks away. Initially, these seemed like standard postal errors. But the pattern was too consistent and specific to be random mistakes. Detective Rodriguez and I started mapping the delivery issues. Every misdelivered item had been processed through Santos's route on days when surveillance was reported. The errors weren't random, they followed a deliberate pattern targeting specific types of mail. Financial documents, medical correspondence, legal notices, and government communications were being systematically intercepted and redistributed. Personal letters and commercial advertisements remained unaffected. Our investigation revealed the surveillance team's sophisticated operation. Using multiple vehicles and personnel, they tracked Santos's exact delivery schedule, identifying homes that received sensitive mail. They had documented her break times, lunch locations, and restroom stops. The actual theft occurred during Santos's lunch break. While she ate at the same deli daily from 12:30 to 1 p.m., someone with postal master keys accessed her truck and systematically removed specific pieces of mail. But they weren't just stealing correspondence, they were replacing it with carefully crafted substitutes. Mrs. Morrison's bank statements were replaced with forgeries showing different account balances and transaction histories. David Chin received fake medical bills with altered payment amounts and due dates. Sarah Williams got modified legal documents with changed court dates and requirements. The replacements were sophisticated enough to fool casual inspection but contained subtle alterations designed to cause financial and legal problems for recipients. We discovered the operation's true scope when Detective Morrison analyzed the targeted addresses. Every household experiencing mail interference had residents involved in local political activities, zoning disputes, or neighborhood association leadership. The manipulation campaign was designed to create chaos in local governance and community organization. By altering financial documents, residents missed mortgage payments and faced foreclosure proceedings. Modified legal notices caused people to miss court appearances, resulting in default judgments. Fake medical bills created insurance disputes and credit problems. The psychological impact was devastating. Neighbors began suspecting each other of mail theft. Community meeting attendance dropped as residents dealt with artificial crises created by the forged documents. Local political initiatives stalled as organizers struggled with manufactured personal problems. Our break came when Santos noticed her postal truck's odometer readings didn't match her actual route mileage. Someone with vehicle access was driving her truck during non-work hours, likely to familiarize themselves with postal procedures and create additional opportunities for mail theft. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses captured images of individuals accessing Santos's truck using authentic Postal Service master keys. The keys had been duplicated, indicating inside knowledge of postal security procedures. The arrest operation involved coordination with postal inspectors and federal authorities, since mail theft is a federal crime. We identified Marcus Reed, a former postal employee terminated 2 years earlier for time theft and attendance issues. Reed had retained access to postal facilities through copied keys and stolen uniforms. His operation involved 4 accomplices, including a graphic designer who created the forged documents and a former bank employee who provided expertise on financial document formatting. Their motivation was financial and political. Reed was being paid $500 per targeted household by a local real estate development company seeking to destabilize the neighborhood for cheaper property acquisition. The developers planned to purchase homes from financially distressed residents at below-market prices. The psychological manipulation was methodical. By creating artificial financial crises, legal problems, and community conflicts, they hoped to pressure residents into selling their homes and moving away from the area. Santos required counseling to overcome the trauma of being constantly surveilled and having her professional integrity questioned. Several residents needed legal assistance to resolve problems created by the forged documents. The case revealed how mail systems can be weaponized for community manipulation. By controlling information flow, criminals can create artificial crises that destabilize entire neighborhoods. Reed and his accomplices faced federal charges for mail theft, forgery, conspiracy, and racketeering. The real estate company executives were charged with bribery and conspiracy to commit fraud. The Postal Service implemented new security measures for Route 47, including GPS tracking on delivery vehicles and enhanced key control procedures. What disturbed me most was how effectively information manipulation could destabilize a community. By altering just a few documents per household, they created chaos that affected dozens of families and disrupted local governance for months. Have you ever suspected your mail was being tampered with? How much do you rely on postal delivery for important financial and legal documents? Sometimes the most trusted systems become tools for sophisticated manipulation campaigns. 8 months after the mail theft case, I responded to a suspicious person call at Westfield Shopping Center that revealed the most dangerous predator I'd encountered in my career. What started as a simple security complaint uncovered a methodical stalking operation that had terrorized late-night shoppers for months. Security guard Mike Torres called it in at 11:47 p.m. on a cold February night. His voice carried genuine concern when he radioed dispatch. "Officer Chin, we've got a serious situation developing here. There's a man who's been hiding in our parking lot for over 3 hours, systematically watching the grocery store exit. Every time someone leaves the building alone, especially elderly customers or women, he follows them directly to their vehicles. This isn't random behavior, it's predatory stalking." Store manager Lisa Park met me at the main entrance, visibly shaken and clutching incident reports. She'd been managing Westfield's grocery section for 6 years and had never dealt with anything this disturbing. "Officer, he's been doing this for weeks now. Always the same pattern, targeting the last customer leaving the store, usually elderly people or women shopping alone during late hours. Our closing staff are terrified to walk to their cars." The pattern Torres and Park described was specific, calculated, and deeply troubling. The suspect, later identified as Robert Hayes, would arrive at the shopping center around 9 p.m. and position himself strategically behind parked cars with clear sight lines to the grocery store's main exit. Hayes had identified optimal hiding spots that provided cover while maintaining surveillance capabilities. He'd studied the parking lot's lighting patterns, security camera positions, and foot traffic flows. His positioning was professional-level surveillance technique. "He knows exactly where our security cameras have blind spots," Torres explained, pointing to the lot's layout. "He moves between vehicles like he's done reconnaissance on our entire security system." Hayes would wait patiently until the store's 11 p.m. closing time, then focus intensely on customers exiting the building. He'd observe each person, evaluating their apparent vulnerability, physical capabilities, and likelihood of resistance. When he identified a suitable target, typically someone elderly, physically small, or appearing distracted, Hayes would begin his pursuit. He'd follow at a calculated distance, staying far enough back to avoid immediate detection while maintaining visual contact with his intended victim. Torres had captured Hayes on multiple security cameras pursuing victims across the parking lot. The footage showed him adjusting his approach based on each target's behavior, demonstrating adaptive predatory tactics. "Mrs. Angela Chin, no relation to you, officer, came out Tuesday night around 11:30. Park explained, reviewing her incident files. "She's 74 years old and shops late specifically to avoid crowds because of mobility issues." Hayes followed her slowly to her car, then rushed forward and started banging on her driver's side window, demanding she give him her groceries immediately. The surveillance footage was genuinely disturbing to watch. Hayes displayed classic predatory hunting behavior, studying potential victims before selecting targets based on their apparent vulnerability. He carried a large backpack and what appeared to be restraint materials tucked into his jacket. His victim selection process was methodical. Hayes would reject potential targets who appeared physically capable, traveled in groups, or showed signs of alertness. He specifically sought individuals who seemed isolated, distracted, or physically compromised. When I located Hayes hiding behind a commercial delivery truck in the lot's northeast corner, his behavior immediately escalated from suspicious to openly threatening. He became agitated and confrontational, displaying signs of severe mental disturbance combined with calculated aggression. "Those people are buying poisoned food," Hayes shouted when I approached him. "The government is contaminating everything in that store. I have to save them from the chemicals they're putting in the groceries." But Hayes's rescue attempts involved physical intimidation, attempted theft, and what appeared to be preparations for abduction. His paranoid delusions about food contamination provided a rationalization for predatory criminal behavior. Hayes, age 38, had an extensive history of mental health crises and 3 prior arrests for stalking behavior. He'd been involuntarily committed to psychiatric care twice in the past year but had been released from the most recent hospitalization just 6 weeks earlier, against medical staff recommendations. His family had attempted to have him committed again, but current legal requirements for involuntary psychiatric holds weren't met. Hayes was functional enough to avoid meeting criteria for immediate commitment, while still posing significant danger to the community. The investigation revealed Hayes had been systematically targeting late-night grocery shoppers for approximately 2 months. His approach was consistent: claim their food purchases were contaminated or poisoned, then demand they surrender their groceries to him for safe disposal. When victims refused his demands or attempted to leave, Hayes would escalate to physical intimidation, blocking car doors, grabbing shopping bags, and making threats about the consequences of consuming poisoned food. We discovered Hayes had successfully assaulted 4 previous victims who hadn't reported the incidents to police. They'd assumed they'd encountered a random homeless person or drug addict and were too frightened or embarrassed to file official complaints. Hayes had stolen complete grocery purchases from 3 elderly shoppers who were too terrified to resist his aggressive demands. He'd consumed some of the stolen food himself and discarded the rest, suggesting his contamination concerns were pretextual rather than genuine. Detective Morrison's investigation revealed the extent of Hayes's planning and preparation. His backpack contained zip ties, duct tape, rope, and a detailed notebook documenting what he called contaminated food sources and descriptions of potential victims. The notebook entries were chilling. Hayes had recorded specific details about victims' appearances, vehicle descriptions, shopping patterns, and assessments of their likelihood to resist or comply with his demands. His documentation showed calculated predatory planning. Hayes had also mapped multiple grocery stores and shopping centers throughout the county, identifying locations with poor lighting, limited security presence, and isolated parking areas. He'd been expanding his hunting territory systematically. The psychiatric evaluation revealed Hayes was experiencing severe paranoid delusions about widespread food contamination conspiracies. However, his predatory behavior demonstrated calculated planning and victim selection that went far beyond mental illness into deliberate criminal intent. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the court-appointed psychiatrist, explained that Hayes's case represented a dangerous combination of untreated mental illness and predatory personality traits. His delusions about food contamination provide psychological justification for behavior that's fundamentally about power, control, and victimization, Dr. Martinez testified. The mental illness explains his motivation, but not the sophisticated planning and victim selection patterns. Hayes was ultimately charged with multiple felonies: stalking, assault, theft, attempted kidnapping, and terroristic threatening. The district attorney's office pursued enhanced charges based on his targeting of elderly and vulnerable victims. The case highlighted critical gaps in mental health monitoring and intervention systems. Hayes had been identified as dangerous by medical professionals, but legal requirements prevented his continued involuntary treatment. His family had attempted to maintain contact and encourage treatment compliance, but Hayes had rejected their assistance and avoided mental health services. The system provided no mechanism for preventing his predictable escalation to violent behavior. Westfield Shopping Center implemented comprehensive security enhancements following Hayes's arrest. Management installed additional lighting throughout the parking lot, expanded security camera coverage, and established escort services for customers shopping alone during late hours. Staff received training on identifying suspicious behavior and predatory surveillance patterns. New protocols required security personnel to actively patrol parking areas during closing hours rather than monitoring exclusively through camera systems. The grocery store modified its closing procedures to ensure no customers left the building completely alone. Staff members were assigned to observe customer departures and provide assistance when suspicious individuals were present in the parking area. But the psychological impact on previous victims and community members lasted much longer than the immediate threat. Several elderly residents stopped shopping during the evening hours entirely, even after Hayes's arrest and imprisonment. Mrs. Angela Chin required counseling to overcome the trauma of Hayes's attack. She'd been shopping independently for decades but now needed family members to accompany her to stores. Her confidence and sense of personal safety were permanently damaged. The case demonstrated how predatory criminals exploit routine community activities like grocery shopping to identify and victimize vulnerable individuals. Hayes had weaponized mental illness to justify behavior that was fundamentally about predation and control. What made Hayes particularly dangerous was his combination of mental instability and calculated criminal planning. His delusions provided motivation, but his actions showed deliberate victim selection and tactical awareness that suggested criminal intent beyond psychiatric symptoms. 6 months after Hayes's conviction, I learned he'd been conducting similar stalking operations at shopping centers in 3 neighboring counties before focusing on Westfield. His pattern was consistent: identify locations with vulnerable customer bases and poor security, then systematically hunt individuals who appeared unable to resist. The broader investigation revealed Hayes wasn't entirely unique. Shopping center security directors reported increasing incidents of predatory individuals targeting elderly shoppers, women shopping alone, and customers with apparent physical limitations. Some cases involved opportunistic criminals seeking easy robbery targets. Others, like Hayes, combined mental illness with predatory behavior to create particularly dangerous threats to community safety. But Hayes's case was notable for its systematic nature and sophisticated planning. He'd studied his hunting grounds, documented potential victims, and prepared tools for escalating from intimidation to physical restraint and potential abduction. The case fundamentally changed how local law enforcement and shopping center security approached late-night retail safety. We developed new protocols for identifying predatory surveillance behavior and responding to suspicious individuals who appeared to be stalking customers. What haunts me most about Hayes's case is how easily he exploited community members' routine activities and sense of safety. People should be able to buy groceries without fear of being stalked, intimidated, or attacked in parking lots. Hayes understood that late-night shoppers were often isolated, distracted, and vulnerable. He'd weaponized their basic need for food shopping to create opportunities for victimization and control. Have you ever felt unsafe leaving a store late at night? Do you take precautions when shopping alone in parking lots or isolated areas? Sometimes the most dangerous predators are those who combine mental instability with calculated hunting behavior, turning everyday activities into opportunities for victimization. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.